Wonderful. All right, everyone. Welcome to our Preservation Subcommittee. Thank you again, everyone, for your time and for your commitment to this work. It is wonderful that you are all still with us and still so engaged, especially as we come into the home stretch. So as you'll see on today's agenda, we are in our second to last meeting, potentially. We're open to letting this evolve so we can make sure to capture all of your input, but we are coming into our high impact recommendations time, and obviously this will inform the majority of our report and the direction that we take for certainly the next year, and hopefully gives us enough direction for the next 3 years. So if you'll see on the agenda, the schedule for developing the recommendations, we have gone through the completeness. As a reminder, if you have a recommendation that should have been submitted and captured, we want to make sure all of your ideas are sort of up on the board, as it were. And so that time has passed, hopefully. You've already submitted, but this is the last call for sister subcommittee recommendations. Dia will speak to that at the end, but we did have that chance to review last week. And hopefully you were both heartened by all of the work that you saw your colleagues doing on the sister subcommittee, and spurred some ideas for, of course, overlap that we know exists in our recommendations and how we can bring this together in a holistic report for our recommendations. And then next week, we'll actually be in person on 4/7. So that date has changed, 4/7 from 9 to 1. We'll be there a little bit earlier than that, and then working towards a written draft on 4/15. So again, as a reminder, we're sort of trying to work, ideally we would be all together and be able to navigate this in person, but trying to effectively use your time and also follow our COVID restraints so we can stay safe. So we wanted to come to you today. Angie, I believe, will help whiteboard on this discussion, but to talk about the high impact recommendations. So your question might be, high impact how? And I know we have talked about a lot of different themes and sort of what's important, what is the data showing us. And so we wanted to spend some time today to discuss and get your input on what are the criteria that we're using to review what high impact means before we just send that survey out. Because of course we all have our own lenses and biases on what's most important and what should be prioritized. And we want this review process to help capture some of those criteria that you can keep at the front of your mind as you review the recommendations. So Angie, do you have screen sharing powers?
I don't know that I have the ball, Hannah, yet. I don't see it. No, I don't have that yet.
Okay, do you mind to share? Oh, I am the presenter now. I can share that. Can you give Angie Hubbard sharing powers, please?
Have them, just give me 1 second.
Great. Wonderful. And as we move into that, Mick, did you have anything that you want to share as we're reviewing this as well? Our fearless co-chair.
I don't have anything to start us off, but just very excited for this conversation where we start pooling the threads of everyone's great work over these past. I guess we're getting close to 3 months now of work, and start pulling it together and sort of figure out, okay, how do we distill all of these great conversations down to something that we can then basically hand to you, Hannah, and help like change the game of housing production and preservation in the city of Nashville going forward. So this is the exciting part.
Amen. Amen. And I will tell you, I have been so energized by your recommendations because it is captures in a really directive way a lot of things that we all know have needed to happen. So one thing I want to highlight before we move into the discussion about the criteria is we will send out a survey asking you to prioritize, not a ranking, but this is not to say that the other ideas will not be captured in the report. They will be, or that they will not be part of our strategy going forward. This is just intended to help provide direction based on what we've heard over and over again is the limited capacity that we have. You know, we all know that if you try to do everything, it can become really quickly a path towards doing nothing. So again, this is an attempt to create some consensus around what we can and should focus on coming out of the gate once this report is released. So all of the recommendations will be captured in the report. And as I think we've all really discussed, you know, this is going to be a continued evolving process. So there might be recommendations that aren't captured as high priority that then, you know, in a year, something in our landscape changes and it becomes now possible to accomplish that with less capacity than is needed now. So we all know the dynamic of the federal government. There's so many things sort of in flux. We could have new funding coming in. We almost certainly will. So we want to make sure we're able to stay agile and responsive to those changes. So thank you to Angie. She's put up potential 4 criteria for you to keep in mind. And Angie, do you just want to review those for the folks here and as we begin to whiteboard these?
Yes, let me get to another screen. Okay. So one of the things we've talked in our co-chairs discussions were the criteria or the lens through which we want to select our top recommendations. And these were 4 largely pulled from the collection table that what you guys, everyone initially where you initially recorded your recommendations. So these are 4 criteria we wanted to start with, vet them through you to see if these are what should stick or to hear your thoughts on how they should be defined. The first criteria being unit production and preservation. What can maybe produce the most units or preserve the most units or have the most likelihood of implementation. System enhancements, which are really foundational to a coordinated interagency approach that will produce and preserve affordable housing units as well as capture opportunity cost. The next potential criteria, equitable impact, that is defined as restoring to Black and Brown communities what has been lost through historic harm. And then the final one, time sensitive, is what can we accomplish within 1 to 3 years. So that's a starting point to vet through you guys. And so it's hard for me to talk and whiteboard, so I'm going to flip it back to Hannah to talk more through this, and I'll make your notes and comments and see what we end up coming out with that gives us a better lens through which we get to those high impact recommendations.
Great. Thank you so much, Angie, and thanks for being our scribe. So the question here to the group is, do you feel like these 4 criteria help you as you review the high impact recommendations to prioritize focused recommendations to the mayor, to our current capacity? And then what's been a helpful framing for me is also what would potentially fit these criteria and not make the cut that we all really think needs to. So is there anything that's not captured in these criteria that could leave us to exclude some important things? So I'll open that up to the group now for your feedback. Council Lady Allen, I see your hand.
I guess just a couple of questions. One thing that I always think about is bang for the buck. And I guess, is that kind of a subset of unit production and preservation? Because that seems important. I mean, I think back to Kay's kind of 4-quadrant evaluation that she's been looking for, and that seems like an important one there. And then the other question that I want to make sure we take into account is which niches are we filling in, and how do we decide which of those we're going to be focusing on, if one or not? The 30, 60, 80, 120 criteria. So those are more questions than answers, but they seem important.
Just to flesh that out a little bit more, Councilmember, do you sort of envision perhaps criteria being, what has the largest impact at 0 to 50%? Are you thinking of it in that level of specificity?
That, I guess the question that I'm answering, not necessarily in that level, but we've talked about people experiencing homeless. Is that the group we're going to focus on, or is it home ownership, or is it workforce? So it's certainly different. Different solutions solve different parts of that, and in a perfect world, we would have all that laid out in a table and be able to assign a solution to each of those and say we have attacked each of those in some way that gets us a lot of bang for our buck. So I guess that's in terms of prioritizing, that may be harder to do.
That's really helpful. Thank you. Marshall, I see your hand.
Yes, and good afternoon, everyone. And I think that's a great question, because I think along those same lines, are we asking the same question about particular neighborhoods that are also, if we're looking at niches along the lines of maybe income levels, is the focus at 60% and below, 30% and below? Is the focus 60 to 80%, and then 80 to 120%? So are we looking at it from those different categories, and also the different neighborhoods that we're focused on? Is there a commitment to the North Nashville community? Is there a commitment to East Nashville? Are there a commitment to, Nolensville Pike or certain areas? Are we looking at it from those areas and the impacts that we want to have? And where does the low-hanging fruit come from in those particular areas as we're trying to address some of these concerns?
That's really helpful. I do wonder how much, so some of this, obviously you guys know that I'll still be calling you even when this group is done. So some of this is, if get a strong recommendation for you to develop a specific tool, then I can come back to you and say, should we focus that tool along Nolensville Pike? Should we focus that tool along, specific geographic census tracts, income levels? So I know it's a little bit of back and forth, but I do think that's some of that evolution process. And I don't know that we're at the place yet with the way that we've, thanks to Greg, have compiled data. I don't know that and some of that's because the way we've moved, we wanted to move quickly in this process, have what we need to say, here's the tools and also exactly how we're going to focus them. But I would love to hear from you. Like, Marshall, do you feel like we're at a place where we should explore making those specific recommendations?
The thing that keeps coming to me is a matter of the issue that not all sizes, not all tools work in every community, or not every tool that we create is going to help every income level. And I think as we're thinking about those particular tools, are we keeping these things in mind? And some of us may, because if I'm focused on homeownership, then I'm really trying to think about what tools are we really identifying here that speaks to home ownership and for what income levels? But at the mayor's level or at the mayor's office, are you also thinking about that? Because I'm thinking, okay, so what am I able to play with and what am I able to utilize? How does this impact the communities I'm serving or the individuals I'm serving as well? So I don't know, in my mind, I have to keep those things in mind as we're thinking about what tools we're trying to create here or what processes we're trying to put in place.
Hannah, I know Greg Claxton's on the call, and he has been the point man for gathering important data for us. And the data that Greg has worked so hard to gather, we still have a ways to go on our data gathering analysis category in our growing building system, which we hope we'll get to. But the data that we have right now is not separated by neighborhoods or geographical location. It's strictly looking at, trying to look at and determine where the greatest needs are for housing and where they might be in the future. It's good data, it's great data, but Marshall, we still have some data gathering to do. And so I think part of, our process as a group is getting our heads around that, because here's the data that we have and know, plus what the rest of us have, in our own toolbox. And so knowing that little bit, what do we think the recommendations should be to help us both in the short term and in the long term? And that's our challenge, quite frankly. I just think that needs to be kind of stated, because we know that strong, healthy neighborhoods are key to correcting some wrongs that happened in the past, strengthening our neighborhoods, and having stable households, financially stable households in those neighborhoods. So how do we get there? But that's an obvious, I think, point to put out there and have us capture, because part of this challenge for me, and I think for many of us, is, are our expectations kind of on the same page, right? Are we on the same page in how we're going to get to this point where we're going to have this compilation of recommendations in the future? Are our minds traveling down the same road? Thanks.
Yeah, that's helpful framing, Kay. I think thinking of it as sort of consensus about the direction, while knowing that, I'll of course be taking all of this, building out some detail around the matrix of, okay, this can work at this level of affordability and this can work there. And we do have some existing mechanisms with our Affordable Housing Council committee at council, but I do think flagging the mechanisms to make sure we're accountable to that question, Marshall, is really important. So it sounds like there's the ongoing data, a market analysis, so we do have the data to be able to make those, census tract level recommendations. The community engagement process, which Kia has talked about, how then do we go in and determine whether the tool is right for the neighborhood, working with planning and doing that proactive work. And then the accountability through a, scorecard or, the ongoing, not just accountability, but really being able to measure ourselves to see, okay, we think this tool is going to work there, but how do we then know whether it works in that income level or area, and then make adjustments. So even if we're not at the level of specificity, I do think we can make recommendations that put the pieces in place, at least. Thanks.
Yeah, and I just want to build on all that. And because we're getting towards the end of our timeline in general, I'd just like to throw out my read on the data so far, which is the need is greatest the lower down the income spectrum you go, but there is still a need, obviously 0 to 30. We look at Greg's numbers, his obvious need, 30 to 50. I think it goes through to maybe even 50 to 60. But it actually, the deficits that accumulate in those income spectrums drag on. So you have to get above 80% of AMI before before a household has a likely chance of finding something affordable to them in the current Nashville market. And so the way that I'd look at it is the need is greatest the lower down the income spectrum, but it goes all the way up to 80, especially on the rental side. The home ownership is a whole other ball game. But I think the data so far provides a pretty good picture of where the sort of need is greatest, and I hope that there is some consensus around that. I'd love to hear other people's opinions if they feel sort of differently. But because we're getting to that point of having to make these prioritization decisions in the next couple of weeks, I'd love to throw out you just my perspective on it, and love to hear other people's thoughts.
Hi, this is Angie. I'm stopping whiteboarding for a second. So it sounds to me like before we even talk criteria, I'm getting the feeling we need to really decide on who we're helping. Is that kind of where we are? So is that a recommendation or something we need to decide is a criteria is, does this help the most in need as a filter?
This is Letha. I agree that we should go up to at least 80% of area median income in helping. I know there's a great need at that lowest level, but there's still a significant need for those at 80% of area median income and really above that, because Nashville housing is so expensive. But I would definitely like to see our recommendations address a need up to 80% of area median income.
Yeah, and I think also the way I look at it is sort of this sort of Berkeley's point of bang for the buck. As Eddie did such a good job pointing out in his presentation a few weeks ago, we know the level of subsidy is different at different income levels. And so I think that's part of our sort of matrix of decision making in terms of prioritization, that all of these things that we know the need is greatest in this particular segment. And we also know that there's actually a real need over here that's worth addressing too, and thinking about how that impacts the overall how we spend a finite amount of resources. I don't know the best way to balance that. For me, my gut feeling is it'd be great to do something at each one of these levels and to do a significant amount at each one of these levels. But that's just my perspective, and I know there's a finite amount of resources out there.
This is Dan. I have a suggestion. My concern is, why don't we look at the tools and evaluate them and show where they may best fit for the different categories? And realizing that, as Mick, you said, we want to have tools for each one of the different categories. Any feedback on that?
I think that's right on. And I think I was just going to say quickly that I think Angie did a great job of color coding the boxes, which sort of talk about that a little bit. So there, we do have a start. I don't know if it fully captures what you're saying, Dan, but I think we've got a good start. And maybe it's just a matter of we have so much information that we've put together. It's hard, I know, for myself to keep it all here. But I do think that maybe if I'm hearing you correctly, that's something we should keep in mind as we start to funnel things as well.
That's right.
And I will say, Dan, that's something I think has to be done. And I would really value over sort of a mechanism to come back to you all in a month, after we've had the internal discussions about policies and the budget and, we have more information on what's coming through the American Rescue Plan, because I've certainly heard a prioritization on 0 to 30, and we know there's a lot of HUD funding coming for that. So that will then impact how our tools can and would evolve. So, we have great research and best practices from peer cities where we can sort of get into the nitty gritty of the tool. And then I could come back and say, okay, here's what we're looking at on this matrix of affordability and this tool being here. So I know we've talked broadly about sort of having the group come back together quarterly or whatever it might be, but I think, that will certainly be ongoing work in terms of ensuring we have something at every level of affordability from 0 to 80. Kay, you had your hand up?
Yes, I was just going to speak to that. And one of the things that I always asked to do was start putting together this toolbox, so to speak. And the toolbox has categories of federal funding, state funding, local funding, loan programs like CITC, assets, other assets, then like public lands, whether it's locally owned or state owned or wherever it is, MDHA owned public lands, and then the voucher program. So started working on what I call it a toolbox. And for example, there is a National Housing Trust Fund, and that trust fund, those grant dollars have to be targeted to the extremely low income category. So, that would be a tool that would be directed to groups that are working to provide housing for that category. When you get into the home ownership side, then you get into different kinds of tools that are needed, very different from the ones where you're trying to do deeply affordable housing. So I think like Hannah, my brain's kind of where hers is, in that part of the work to be done is targeting tools to where they could best fit. And then you apply the policy side to it.
Yes, but I do think that direction, like Lethea was saying, on the recommendation, sometimes these planning processes could take 18 months if we were doing an entire 10-year plan. We chose strategically to do something that is more of a sprint and focused on what we can do in the short term to make sure we're not missing out on opportunities that our community, we know the need exists yesterday. So we wanted to sort of unleash what we can, introduce what we can, while also, of course, building that long-term commitment. So even the direction, like Lethea was saying, to say we want a tool at every income level up from 0 to 80, that is powerful because it helps focus our resources, and it sort of gives us a direction to say, okay, we're headed in the right direction with this tool, and it forces us to say we actually don't have something at this income level, and we need to go out and either build it or find a way to leverage other funds.
So Hannah, I'm making a text of a possible criteria, and we do want to keep these around 4-ish, I guess, so our minds can, but maybe rather than unit production, most impactful tools addresses all income levels up to 80% in a variety of ways, whether it could be through creation of new units, rental or home ownership, or through preservation. Would that be a criteria that would be comfortable with everybody based on, it sounds like we're looking for maybe some tools that can get to everything until we get that narrower piece defined. I'm just going to throw it here for feedback.
Great. Thank you, Angie. And I will say, Kelsey shared yesterday the idea of depth or breadth. And I think that's also helpful framing in that, Angie, that most impactful tools perhaps, either addresses from 0 to 80 or has a very deep impact in the specific affordability range. So knowing that there are some tools that might not address everything, but would be really powerful for a specific range. And I also want to open up to feedback on that. And I saw Eddie's hand if he has, you want to jump in, Eddie?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Uh-huh.
Okay. All I want to do is throw in another dimension on this conversation. And I think it's a very important and critical conversation. But remember that, as I understood it, one of our biggest charges was what can we do in 3 years? So, in looking at the timeline side, if you use the analogy of low-hanging fruit, the 80%'s the lowest, the 60%'s in the middle of the tree, and the 30%'s at the top of the tree. And so I think that we need to harvest fruit from the whole thing. But I really do think that in all of these discussions, I think that it's going to be easier or to include the issue of what can we do in 2021, what can we do in 2022. And I think that a lot of those income things will be addressed. And we may say, well, all we've done is 60%ers this year. Well, let's look at the other two directions. But that's just a thought as to what can we get going in 3 years on top of all the income discussions. Okay, that's just it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that.
Angie, are we giving you what you need from this process? I know I've gone off on tangents myself, so I feel a bit bad, so I want to check back in with you.
Well, I'm taking your all's notes so we can all together see themes that are coming out, and hopefully these commonalities will get us to criteria that we can better use, that we can use as a solid lens for us to select our recommendations. So yes, this discussion, led me to put the most impactful tools. It sounds like the depth and breadth is one thing that where we would have flexibility if we wanted to select a neighborhood in Marshall's case, or if we wanted to select an income group, that we've identified these tools as the most impactful.
I think in terms of process, if we're trying to get to the point where tomorrow a survey would go out that has the criteria that today we all say, yep, we want these criteria listed. So that's where we're trying to get to with this current discussion. Am I right, Angie?
Yes, Kay, that is exactly that. This discussion is really to help you when this survey comes to look at the almost 40 recommendations we have from the preservation group and say, okay, of these, how on earth do I narrow down to 8? And that doesn't mean these are the only 8 that'll ever get done. These are the 8 that we have said we need to focus on in this time frame that we have this 1 to 3 years. So what for you all will help get you there in that decision-making process?
I'll just say for myself, this conversation and hearing everyone's thoughts of different things to think about is really helpful. And if someone was to send me a survey and say, what are these? I think it is around impact. And part of me is like, maybe it is just one criteria that we take this whole thing that goes behind it that we've discussed. There's part of me that leans towards that. There's another part of me that would open up to the group here and see, does anyone have a nice synthesis of this conversation? I don't have one right now, but I would love to hear other people's thoughts. If they could hear all the different threads that are being picked up on and maybe synthesize it, that we could come to a shared understanding. So I would start out there, see if anyone feels game about putting together a sentence or two or three that sort of helps synthesize this.
So in my mind, oh, I'm sorry, this is Marsh. I didn't raise my hand. Can I raise my hand now? Okay. No, sorry about that. Just quick on the.
No problem. You just jump in.
So in my mind, what I hear from Nick, as a complete summary of what I think people are thinking, it's a matter of saying, if you're going to send me a survey that has me determine what tools work best, I'm thinking in my mind, tools for what? Okay, so what are we trying to do here? Are we hanging, wallpaper? Are we hanging, some plywood over here? Are we building a floor? Are we building a house? Then it's a matter of saying, okay, so for who? So I'm ultimately thinking about, okay, am I doing this for East Nashville? Am I doing this for North Nashville? Am I doing this for Bellevue? Or if I'm doing this, when I think about those neighborhoods, then I think about who actually, the people that actually can live in those particular neighborhoods, and where am I going to be able to do that without the least amount of resistance? Because the type of housing that I'm building in this neighborhood does not want that, those people do not want that housing. When I'm thinking about the income level that we're talking about here, there are certain neighborhoods that people do not want that income level living in that particular neighborhood, or the concentration of that income level. So when I'm thinking about this yellow boxes and what people are saying here, I'm simply thinking about it from a standpoint that if you're going to send me a survey, who are we talking about from an income level? Where are we talking about that they're living? And then what can we possibly do within a 3-year period that really has a certain level of impact? That's what I'm gathering, basically what I heard from just these 3 boxes, in my opinion.
That's awesome, Marshall. I really, that's really great.
Since nobody else was saying anything, I don't like dominating, but I do want to put it in a kind of, because when I think about tools, I think we just need to be clear what tools are, because of the simple fact that if I have a nail and I need to use that nail, then I got to think about, what I'm thinking about is that the nail is not the tool for me. The tool is, am I using a hammer, a screwdriver, or what type of that? And I think that we have to be very clear of what we're talking about that are actual tools. Eddie provided a great source of financial resources. So some tools that we think about have a financial element to it, but other tools don't have a financial element that as specifically. So when we're breaking out and talking about those tools, let's be clear of what we're describing as a particular tool. Like I'll just use this as an example. Inclusionary zoning is a tool that doesn't have a financial aspect to it. A housing trust fund has a tool that has a financial resource to it. So it's a matter of us being very clear of what those tools are, what is actually a tool versus a finance. I just think financial resources are characterized a little differently than being called a particular tool. So.
Yeah, I agree, Marshall. I think it's helpful to be specific about the language, because using the framing of recommendations, they are not all tools, and you're exactly right. Some of them are really valuable, saying we want to prioritize additional capacity. That's not a tool, but it does provide a lot of direction to our office to say, okay, people are seeing that there's, understaffing is causing delays unnecessarily. So I do think we're almost like a step back, and my hope is that, of course, these are then turned into tools that you guys can all put to use. But that's where I do think the system enhancements that has been called out as sort of a criteria or a lens through which to think of it, recommendations, is just something that I've heard consistently from you all. But you're right, we're sort of, you know, a step before the tools, because I think I've heard a consistent theme that we don't necessarily have the capacity to be able to implement all of the things or track or recruit in the way that you all, I think, see that the city is capable of.
So Hannah, oh, in my box here, I changed the word tool, and let me scroll into most impactful opportunities. That could relate to a policy change that even if we had the tool or the financial resource, couldn't be implemented without that change. Or it could be a major financial resource, or it could be a tool. So I don't know if that's making it muddier or more vague for you guys, but it does help me narrow in as I think about all these recommendations, looking through, and I'm like, of these, what are the most impactful opportunities that if we don't act on these, the opportunities lost are so great, we may not be able to overcome them.
Lethea, I see you've got your hand up.
Oh, good.
Let's see here. Well, this is kind of a different topic right now, but hearing, you know, we often get pushback on when we're talking about building affordable housing. So my question is, do we always have to say we're building affordable housing, or can we just say we're building housing? Why do we have to label we're building affordable housing in this area? Why do we have to put that label on there? And then on the other side of that is, and when building affordable housing, to also avoid that label, can we flip it, like when we ask developers when they're building new buildings, can you include some affordable housing in our development that we're talking about? Can we include 1 or 2 units that aren't limited by income? And then, of course, that's again taking that label off of it, saying we're building affordable housing.
I like that, Lethea. And part of me thinks, I think about the person developing a $3 million home in Belmead is also developing affordable housing for a specific market segment as well. They are not going to build something that nobody can afford, even though the price point is very different from what we're talking about here. So I think you're absolutely right on that.
I would agree, and you hear me often talk about what I call mixed income housing, and that is income housing for a variety of income sources. I mean, mixed income.
I'm looking at these other 4 criteria we need to reach some sort of agreement on, in terms of language and words used. How are we going to get there? I mean, I'm looking at our time together.
I did have, and this was something I reflected on about the equitable impact criteria, and I don't know about you guys, but to me, I feel like the commitment from the beginning of whatever we do, it's a given. It's going to have an equitable impact, and and as we have a value discussion maybe later, that's just an inherent value rather than a criteria. Because I hope no one looks through this and says, oh, this, you know, I hope all of these have an equitable impact, or we really shouldn't do them. In my opinion, that should be a commitment. But if that's what we want to have as a criteria, then that is certainly however you want that viewed. So I was wondering if instead of the unit production and preservation criteria, we do the most impactful opportunities, because here we're more just talking about physical spaces rather than policy changes or getting the right financial resources in. I don't know, we can do both. Obviously, we need the time sensitive or realistic? That needs to be one of the criteria. Is it realistic to achieve in 1 to 3 years? So I'm going to add, I am going to have, I'm putting what could be new 4 or reconstituted these or these same 4 down this way as we talk through them. But yes, we have great discussion still around messaging, the right way to message affordable housing, mixed income, but we do really need to get to these criteria hammered out so that Hannah can get the wording done and the surveys out to you guys tomorrow, I guess, or this evening or whenever she'll have that ready.
Is it what I'm sort of hearing, and this may be just my perspective on it, from what you're saying, Angie, seems to me that sort of time-sensitive realisticness could fit into that. That could just be appended to that most impactful opportunities, and then like adding that to it. And then for me, the idea of having one evaluative criteria, which is sort of what we're discussing right now, then perhaps the survey could be ranking, okay, what fits the best, what fits this definition the most to the least. Not that the least is not impactful, but not quite as impactful as the most. And that might be a way to evaluate our 40, close to 30 some recommendations. But that's just my perspective. I welcome alternative ones. If people prefer to have several different things to think about when they evaluate and put it all together, I don't know.
Well, I think in terms of a model or an example to use, Dia kept steering us, and she steered us to Austin's blueprint, which most of us have studied and read that, and kind of as an example for to organize this work the best that we can in our environment, knowing we've not done an extensive community engagement process, but that their model list 4 criteria. I don't know why. And so that's how we got to this 4 criteria position that we have. Doesn't mean we can't change it or modify it, but that's how we got here because it was following that example.
That makes a ton of sense. And Kay, what do you, I mean, I wasn't able to make the planning call yesterday. Do you think we should stay with that 4, or do you like the idea of shrinking it down to fewer criteria? What's your thoughts about it all?
I'm not married to the 4. I'm fine to shrink it down. We almost could just have this 1 and probably cover if we think about it realistically. Angie's wording right here, here's the criteria. It almost could cover things with it. Even, the system enhancement or government capacity issue, with the housing, a coordinated housing department and system to keep all this together and directed forward. I'm swinging back and forth on that. Just looking at the word that we have right now.
Yeah, Angie's done a good job sort of wordsmithing.
But if we wanted to break it down to where it's easier to digest, we could maybe say a high impact opportunity is one that, number 1, addresses all income levels up to 80%. Number 2, can be used for a wide range of activities or have breadth and depth. And number 3, can realistically be achieved in 1 to 3 years.
I like that.
But
So Anna, do you want to push the data presentation to next week so you guys can concentrate on developing a criteria that everybody's comfortable with? Would that be best for the agenda?
I think we're sort of honing in. How are you guys feeling? I don't get the sense that we need a lot more time with this.
Okay. Because we can push data to next week as well, or to the next convening.
Okay. What are
Okay.
people feeling? Do we want the rest of we have, about 40 minutes left.
I think we have enough time. I think we have enough time to do the data piece. I really want folks to have that opportunity to see what Greg's done and ask him questions. I think that's important to how we think about our future steps. And in terms of, yeah, and I think we need to keep system enhancements, if that's the phrasing that's used. I think we need to keep that as a separate criteria because it's just fundamental to the success of anything. So I'd like to keep it separate.
Well, Kay, just to play devil's advocate about, it sounds to me like you rate that as the most impactful. And so when you're filling out this survey, you're saying that's the most impactful thing, and it's no question in your mind at all. Just to throw that out there.
That's true. That's true. And I would say that.
And I do think Angie's language saying opportunities is, sort of strategically broad, so that it could incorporate, like Marsha was saying, a specific tool. It could incorporate a financing commitment. It could incorporate capacity. I do want to see Jeremy or Edwina, if there's anyone who hasn't shared or given feedback, I want to make space for that now.
This is Jeremy. I don't think I have anything to add as far as the priorities go. I think we're on the right track. It's just, like you said, it's really hard to pick a favorite for what you want to focus on. And I like the naming of, when we call it affordable housing, I think we're really trying to alleviate people's fears because of what public housing became known as. It's a challenge for marketing.
Messaging.
Which is certainly one of the recommendations that could be prioritized. So if people feel comfortable with this language, I think it does a good job, sort of incorporating the discussion. And then the real purpose of spending this time was so that we didn't all just go individually siloed into this survey and sort of pick the things that we view as high impact. I think it's really valuable to flesh out what high impact means, hear from each other, and then be able to sort of check yourself to think, okay, I know I'm always drawn to this, but man, that discussion really brought X, Y, Z to my lens. And so let me incorporate that into how I'm thinking of these. So we'll be sending those out, that survey out. I know that Mick, you mentioned ranking them. We're currently on the agenda, we're talking about format. I think that could become a little bit cumbersome for folks. You can get into, okay, how do I pick between these two? Would people feel comfortable with, picking 20%, say, of the recommendations, high impact with this definition, knowing, of course, to reiterate that the other 80% will not be, tossed to the side. They'll still be in the report, but we want to give sort of clear consensus and direction for the next 1 to 3 years.
If we didn't feel good about ranking, would we feel, and this is the same thing, but putting them into like 3 or 4 tiers? Just so we get, of like, tiers of 5 things. I don't know, just throwing it out there. I'm happy with whatever other folks think in regards to this.
I like the idea of tiers.
Or what about maybe a scale from like 1 to 5, with 5 most impactful, 3 medium, and 1, it is impactful, but not the most. I don't know. And then that way we actually can produce some kind of graph or objective outcome.
I love that. Psychologists have been using those Likert scales for decades, and they seem to think that they work. I'm big. I love that suggestion.
Or maybe just 1 to 3. 1 for at least 2, maybe, and 3 is most. And that way we're not having all these numbers in between trying to define.
Feedback on that? Would you feel comfortable? Can you sort of get your mind around that scale idea? I do like that because then people can sort of evaluate them one by one versus trying to necessarily rank all of them or select.
I think that's fine. That's fine. The thing I would worry about is, don't we need to force ourselves not to label everything a 3 or the highest rating? And so can we put a collar around it, say you get so many votes for high and you get so many votes for medium, so many votes for low?
That's a good point. Licia, you look like you have something.
I was just agreeing with John on and trying to think of a survey that I have done where it is that way. You can't rate them all 1, so we do need to have a set number of how we can distribute to really show which ones we believe are the most impactful.
Okay. Well, I can work that out on the back end. What I'm hearing is that we want the opportunity to not just pick prioritized or not prioritized, that we want some space, for multiple tiers, I think, as Mick said. So I could format it so that, you can pick this many that are most impactful, a secondary tier, and then the remainder, and, we could cap 5 for most and 5 for secondary. I don't know that the number matters as much, but does that framing then feel possible for folks? Doable?
I think that's good.
Okay. Oh, Eddie, I see your hand.
Just one thought is I like what we're doing. I like where we are, but I really think that we have to look at 2 angles on this. Is that one is, let's say like the most important thing we've got on the table is to get the state's control over Nashville's resolution to Nashville's housing problem to eliminate that or minimize it. Let's say that's the most important thing out there. Well, let's say like that can't be done for 4 years. Well, if we're looking at it 1 to 3 years, that could be a 2 or a 3. But if you're looking at it in the overall thing, that could be a 5. So some of these things, we just need to remember that it's sort of a 2 or 3 dimensional ranking. It's not just a flat linear thing. That's all I'm saying.
Stood out to me as well, Eddie. I think it's worth maybe adjusting that wording and not to get too technical, but that realistically can be achieved in 1 to 3 years. We could say, realistically can be achieved or sort of needs to be started. I think there will probably be a couple recommendations that we won't be able to completely accomplish, but they're so important that we really need to, sort of get started on them in the first 3 years.
Yeah. Something like significant progress can be made in the next 1 to 3 years.
That's such an important idea because, we need to ask ourselves, what can we do in the next 3 years to make things possible that are essential in the out years? And if we decide to blow it off because it doesn't get done in 3 years, then we're going to miss that opportunity to position ourselves for year 4, like Eddie's saying. So, I mean, I think that's a very important conversation to have, that some of what we're going to work on is a longer game than just putting money in a pot and building a house tomorrow, that we need to pay attention to today in order to get to the promised land someday.
Amen.
I think Hannah, I think it's important that our survey tool is structured in such a way somehow so that people don't think in their mind they must choose things that can only have an impact within the first 3 years. And we know we don't want that. Some of these things, though, we must do certain things within the next 3 years to get us to the point whereby we get the monkey off our back, right? But we can't just sit and not do anything.
Right.
So I don't know how the wording's going to be structured, but I guess if I could control people's minds, I want their minds to think that way and not the other way. So we got 37 people.
Yes, and you're exactly right. And I can, like you said, wordsmith the survey. I think, the most important and valuable aspect is this conversation to flesh out these nuances. But then I'll sort of put a couple of these things as reminders to folks. So as you're taking the survey, this isn't just a, checklist of everything we can do and done in the next 3 years. I think we've had a really substantial conversation about how we know that this is a much longer commitment. There are some things we can do in the short term that will be really impactful, but not all of them will be complete. Some of them will just be launching something. Some of them will be systems work. Some of them will be, those relationships with rural counties that we've talked about in terms of addressing the state. So I'll make sure to include the language that Angie's captured here in the survey, and then sort of bucket it so that people can tier things, and then I'll get that out. Is there anything that people have not voiced yet that feels really crucial to how we address this high impact conversation? And I want to frame, I know that this has been a little bit in the weeds, but this detail and this language sharing is so important as your delegates and co-chairs move into the in-person session next week, so that we have an understanding of sort of what, like Marshall said, who is this for? Where are we in the stage of this? We don't have all the information we need to make, recommendations at a council district by council district level, but we have substantial recommendations to make for directional purposes. But I'm really grateful for all of your engagement, so that as we go into that smaller group meeting, folks don't feel like, wait, I had a totally different understanding of what high impact meant and what we were doing here. So I really appreciate this discussion. Last call for thoughts or guidance.
Hannah, just to make sort of an obvious political nuance point, is that I'm sure that part of the reason we all work in service of the mayor. He's built this task force for us to give him recommendations, and he's got a 4-year term. So, part of it is he doesn't want to be in the end of his term and not be able to have a stake in the ground saying we made meaningful progress around housing by focusing on the 10-year plan instead of the 3-year plan. So we might need to give some thought as to how some of these longer objectives can create short-term wins that can be a credit to the mayor in the time that he's in office, but still recognize that this is a problem that transcends mayoral terms.
And I was actually the person that said that we should do 3 years, and I'm not the political advisor at our office. So it's come to my attention that it could be viewed as, maybe trying to make sure that things are shored up in his term. Really the focus, you're right, it is his term, but my focus on that was to make sure that what we're committing to can actually be achieved and won't be lost in, a potential transition or anything like that. That, the joy of a 10-year plan is you do have that long-term vision, but as we've seen with previous, plans or focuses, those things can change when you get outside of an administration. So by doing some time constraint here, we can say, okay, we do have some knowledge of what our constants will be for the next 3 years. And, let's get to work and commit to those things, while also, like you said, we know it's going to be a much longer term work as well. All right, if anyone has any additional thoughts before I send out the survey tomorrow at noon, feel free to send those my way. For the sake of the agenda, we will keep moving through the updates from our working groups. Had a really productive meeting with planning. They were able to go through some of the specific concerns that folks had about, development someone has been working on, or questions around parking. I don't know that we need to sort of rehash that. It was really valuable to hear planning's feedback and on the challenges they're facing as well. So I think it was really enlightening on both sides. I was really grateful to Lucy and Greg and Bob for hearing the nuances of the conversations. I don't know that we reached a place where it was necessarily specific recommendations came out of it, but I do think it really informed how we'll evolve. Anyone else that was in attendance that wants to add something I missed?
Oh, I'd just add that one of the things that we asked them for, and Greg's part of this group, so it shouldn't be any trouble, is for their recommendations from how they're seeing land use challenge and housing affordability, because we can give them recommendations, but if they're not going to work, that's a little less productive. So if they have novel, unconsidered recommendations to make them, we haven't seen it yet, but Greg's right here, so I will let him.
And just to chime in that, since I am sort of the tip of a bureaucratic iceberg, I have started working to sort of draft some things and circulate for internal review that kind of ties together the discussion from Monday with the recommendations from both committees.
Wow, that's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. We'll come right back to you, Greg. Mick, do you want to give Mick or Kay a summary of the vouchers meeting with Norman?
Oh, I can do that. I was writing up a report, but I can give a quick verbal report. There were some fundamental key learnings around voucher use of existing vouchers. And so one of the things we learned is that in the meeting is that there's more, some vouchers for homeless or formerly homeless are not being used. And so the question is why? And so the next step is to figure out that why. And there's also extra capacity to, as Norman Deep said, for more vouchers to be directed towards the homeless impact division, but there's some analysis there. One key learning is there's an analysis that needs to be done around that. In terms of there are HUD rules that have to be followed for the overall voucher program, which we learned yesterday from Norman. And so by statute, 75% of the new admissions for vouchers in a calendar year must be for populations 30% and below. That's a HUD rule. However, he doesn't believe that they being MDHA has the authority under the statute, they'll have to look into it, to target a higher percentage of those vouchers to 30% and below. He has to check that out. There is a small area fair market rent program. It's called a Hcv Mobility Program that would allow for that goes by the fair market rent for the zip codes. And so it would allow for people to move to areas of greater opportunity, but you have to apply with HUD to participate in that program, and they have done that. They don't know if they're approved yet, and if they are approved, it's going to take a year of planning. The next key learning is at one time, some of you may remember this, under the House Nashville program, there was money, it was Metro dollars, as I understand from Metro's budget, to provide $1,000 incentive for landlords to come in and participate in the housing voucher program as incentives. But what we got into yesterday, particularly for the harder to house populations, is the upfront money is only one small piece of it. that landlords need greater assurance it gets to risk management. And if they have a concern about people with particular challenges, that they're not going to be left alone. So that's another reason that there has to be a considerable focus and work and program designing around, this is for private landlords, around landlord engagement and what they need and what they want, what their expectations is in order for them to really have the incentives they want to come into the voucher program. MDHA administers a plethora of voucher programs targeted to different populations. There is some capacity within those different types of programs to add more vouchers to that. So I didn't have time to do this, Hannah, but I was just going to compile all this into a report for you in writing. And once Norman checks it and makes sure my facts are straight, then you could just send it out to people.
That will be so helpful, because I was just thinking, with all the work that the Homeless Impacts Division is doing right now with landlord engagement and what they're about to launch, I think this group should be aware of it, and it will really inform how we focus our resources. If we see that landlord incentive with the risk mitigation be, really powerful, then should we devote Barnes resources to it, or, do some kind of funding stream, really advocate for more money in the operating budget. So thank you so much, Kay. I do want to make sure we have time for Greg to give his data presentation. Greg, is that a 10-minute presentation, or should we punt to a later date?
I think I can do sort of a brief introduction, brief update in 10 minutes for sure.
Great. Do you have the screen sharing?
I don't.
Can the screen please be transferred? I don't know if Angie has it to Greg.
What do I need to do? Sorry.
Do you have the screen sharing? No problem. Can you send it to Greg?
Sorry, Anna, I don't know what I'm looking at to pass along. I have the button at the bottom that says share content, but what do I need to pass?
Hi, Kenya. Kenya, can you move the ball to Greg Claxton? We would really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right, got it. Thank y'all. Okay, so with the data group, we've been kind of refining some of the prior work that we had, and then expanding on the gap analysis in particular. I'm going to focus on the gap part, because that's I think where the newest information is. So as part of this, I think I mentioned last week, we've identified, 3 pieces of a gap analysis. One is sort of the current gap based on Census 2019 data. This was what EPS had done a few years ago. That's kind of the baseline gap analysis that we were looking at. The second was a model from the Austin Strategic Housing Blueprint about kind of what's needed to keep up with population growth. And then the third, and this is kind of the newest and a little bit, kind of working with round numbers here, but just thinking through about homelessness and kind of the unhoused population as an additional source of gap that's out there. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this gap analysis. This is the EPS model. It's a snapshot from 2019, except to say that as we think about the 2 columns on the right, the owner gap and the renter gap seems pretty straightforward. We spent a fair amount of time talking about the ownership gap on the low end and how that looks like a surplus of affordable units for low-income home, or for the low-income population. That's probably a little misleading, just because there are other obstacles in the way of affording a home, and that in a lot of cases, like these are because we are dealing at the countywide scale, these are a lot of homes that are in kind of very far out locations that are just disconnected from other services or old and aging houses, that kind of thing. So they're not really necessarily reflective of an oversupply of homes that people earning under 30% of the median household income can afford. So we've kind of tended to focus thinking on the renter gap on the right side, and the way that even if there's a surplus at sort of the 50 to 60% level or the 60 to 80% level, like one of the things that's happening is lower income households are sort of forced up to rent at that level, which is burdensome, even though here it shows as quote unquote a surplus. But this is an update on a slide that you've seen before. This is a new one. This is kind of an Austin model that basically we took their methodology here and literally just pasted in pieces of kind of getting the data for Nashville. And the basic idea is that you look at how many housing units Davidson County has now, you look at how fast the region as a whole is growing through 2030, and then you use that to project out kind of what the housing need is, about 53,000 units. And then to get to kind of affordability levels, you basically say, in the future, it's probably going to be more or less like it is today. So we just carry through kind of the percentage of households at each income level and say that in the future, that's what we're going to need. And so kind of based on that, we get to about 18,000 new units, under 80% of the median household income needed through 2030. And then it's not shown here, but later on I'll show a slide where we use some information where we break this down based on the number of renters and the number of owners at each income level to get sort of that renter gap that's comparable with the prior slide. And then the last thing, and it's still like, this is still, I kind of think of this as a little bit of a placeholder number just to identify that conceptually this is another group of folks who need homes, kind of out of the universe of affordable housing. And these are folks who are homeless. So Hannah was kind enough to reach out to Dr. Judy Tackett and get an update from social services from the HMIS. And what they were able to report was about 4,800 clients that they're working with in HMIS that are unduplicated based on kind of the services they're receiving, not including coordinated entry folks. And then there's another 1,200 folks who are only in coordinated entry. So that suggests, again, these are kind of things that are at different time points. Some of it's a little bit dated, but it suggests that there's about 6,000 people in the HMIS universe that are kind of receiving homelessness services who need homes. We haven't followed up yet. I haven't followed up yet to sort of see if there's a sense of children versus adults or how that would compare to households, but kind of roughly assuming one household per every two people, that would get us at, like I said, a very round number of 3,000 units needed for people and families currently without homes. So then the next thing to do, is just kind of looking and thinking about these gaps that we have, looking just here at the rental gaps and just thinking about how those add up together. So again, you get kind of on the lowest income level, the highest need of a total gap through 2030 of 21,000 units. And then, kind of as you move up the income level, that number fluctuates a little bit between 3,000 and 6,000. But like just on the rental side, that's kind of the universe of needs that we have, both kind of the current gap that people need to have more of an affordable living situation, addressing homelessness, and then keeping up with population change over the next 10 years. So that's sort of the context in which we're working within. That's sort of the case for change that we have. The next thing, and I'm going to go through this really fast, is we've continued to flesh out the affordable unit inventory. This is just kind of a quick overview slide. We've got about 25,000 units currently in that from a variety of sources. We've mostly got these deduplicated, but that's an ongoing process. the trend slides that y'all have seen before. There's not a whole lot of new stuff. We're looking at Barnes Fund for rehab projects, LIHTC for acquire and preservation. This one's been updated with more recent data in the last week. Housing choice vouchers, Barnes Fund for new creation of units, pilot supporting LIHTC. This is all stuff y'all have seen before. The new thing that we've done is we got a request to break out the 4% versus the 9% tax credits because those operate a little bit differently. Whoops, sorry. And so here, kind of breaking that out and looking at recent trends there, we wound up in kind of a similar realm of you know, kind of what the recent trend activity and what, you know, projecting that forward, what that would produce, again, around sort of 4,500 to maybe 5,500 units between the two programs. This is one where the data group spent a fair amount of time thinking through kind of what that 425 units per year, whether that seemed right to them. We talked through, you know, noting that Jeremy had a cautionary note when we looked at this a few weeks ago about kind of how sustainable the recent productivity was in Nashville. And out of that discussion, we actually landed on thinking about the likely trend here as being maybe 650 units per year. I just want to highlight that because that's the number that I use in the next couple of slides. All of this trend stuff is trying to put together a sense of what are we going to have by 2030 if these trends that we've identified, if they continue. And so here, what we've done is we've kind of broken out the affordable housing inventory a couple different ways. One is noting MDHA units or properties that MDHA owns, kind of the number of units that are there and treating that as fixed. Although, you know, RAD is going on, you know, sort of how we incorporate that is something we can dig into at a future meeting. Kind of keeping a slice for the housing choice vouchers. And then these light orange bars is where we look at kind of the current existing affordable units and how they expire through 2030. So, you know, we've got 18,800 this year based on just if everything that's going to expire through 2030 actually expires, that would decline to about 16,600. Then what we've done is on top of that, the next three colors, the dark yellow or the dark orange, the light green, and the dark green are all of those trend lines that we were working through earlier. So new units preserved through Barnes and LIHTC, new LIHTC 4%, and new LIHTC at 9%. And so what you see is kind of two things happening, current stock expiring, and then these kind of trend lines of newer preserved units over time. And so all of that builds to the sort of the 2030 snapshot. This is, you know, presenting that final bar in a different way, which is kind of the sources of these units, and looking at a total of 40,672 income restricted units in 2030. That's an increase from 2020 of about 7,800. But for context, if you only look at the growth trend, for households earning below 80%, we need 13,000. So you see progress, but still slipping behind. And that is the very, very fast summary of kind of the data work right now.
This is fantastic. Thank you, Greg. Is it at a point where we could share with the task force members so they can review sort of at their own pace and sort of study the colors, or not yet?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share this around. As I was going through, I saw one or two corrections, but we can get this out pretty quick.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Greg.
Sure
that is going to be really helpful as we make recommendations on where we could increase funding. And all right, Dia, do you want to take us home?
Hi, folks. So here's the really exciting news. This subcommittee has two delegates identified, Mr. Dan Lane and Ms. Lethea Mann. And Angie, do you want to lead us through floor nomination to round out the team? And Hannah, I'll let you.
I literally have to jump off at 1:30 to lead another meeting.
Oh, goodness.
Sorry.
So Kay, would you like to lead us?
I'll do it then when I have to jump off if we're still debating. Dia, if you could take it home, or Kay. But
Sure.
so thanks first for Lethea and for Marshall nominating Lethea and Dan. They both have agreed. We're looking for one more delegate and would love to have any floor nominations, either yourself, if you nominate someone else, make sure you get their permission. So come on, I know somebody else wants to come in person next week, and let's work on narrowing these recommendations. Marshall? No? Yeah? What you think? I can see your wheels turning. John, we would love to have any of you. All of your voices are super important. Eddie, come on now. I don't want to have to follow up with a volunteer.
Could you please state the time commitment that you're asking for?
Sure thing. It's Wednesday, April 7th. We'll open doors at 8:30. We kick off at 9 a.m. at City Hall. And then it will end at 1. And so give yourself probably a little 30 to 40 minutes on the other side.
So I like Marshall. I like Eddie. I will volunteer if there are no other volunteers. I can do it. I do wonder if Marshall or Eddie would be a better choice, just in terms of their deeper knowledge of the subject.
I think Angie, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Okay.
I think we've got a John.
I think we got a John.
So we have a slate of, am I calling now for just a thumbs up agreement for the slate, Dia? Is that the right procedural thing to do, or we doing?
Well, I think we agreed that it's basically by acclamation. So I think we've got John as our third delegate from the Preservation Subcommittee. So welcome aboard, John, Lethea, and Dan. We're so delighted to have you join us next Wednesday. I will be sending out more information about the half day, but please mark your calendars. And just one last plug, which is if you have any more recommendations for your sister subcommittee for the Creation Committee, please get those in by tomorrow. Back to you, Hannah. Good to see everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for talking things through today. I feel like we have a really strong shared understanding of what we're looking for in our recommendations. So that survey will be coming your way tomorrow morning. Thank you so much,
Hannah,
everybody. Yes.
We need to respond by when to the survey?
We will close it out Monday, and that will give me enough time to return the results to folks so you guys can actually see what your delegates will be taking into the in-person on Wednesday.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.